You open the app, you type in your destination, you request a ride, and then you wait. The car gets close. You can see it on the map. It is a block away. Then the notification comes. Ride canceled. You request again. Another driver accepts. Another cancellation. This is not a glitch. This is not bad luck. For millions of wheelchair users across the United States, this is what getting a ride looks like. Nearly 40% of wheelchair users who have used Uber or Lyft report being denied service. Not once, regularly. This is the story of a transportation revolution that left an entire community behind. And the billion-dollar companies that are still getting away with it. To understand why this keeps happening, you have to understand how Uber and Lyft actually work. Both companies classify themselves as technology platforms, not transportation companies. This is not just branding, it is a legal strategy. By positioning themselves as a platform connecting riders with independent contractor drivers, they fall outside the direct reach of many transportation regulations, including parts of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The ADA requires transportation providers to accommodate people with disabilities. But Uber and Lyft argue that they are not the ones providing the transportation. The drivers are, and the drivers are independent contractors who own their own vehicles. So when a driver pulls up, sees a wheelchair, and hits cancel, the company says that is an individual driver decision, not a company policy. But here is the thing. The company built the system. The company designed the app. The company sets the pay structure that incentivizes fast pickups and short loading times. And the company created an environment where accommodating a wheelchair user costs the driver time and money with no additional compensation. Let us talk about the numbers. A study published in the Transportation Research Record surveyed 341 wheelchair users across the United States about their experiences with rideshare apps. Nearly 40% reported being denied service. The most common problems were lack of accessible vehicles, driver cancellations upon arrival, and extremely long wait times. In New York City, which has the most regulated rideshare market in the country, a February 2026 report found that only 7% of the nearly 106,000 for-hire vehicles licensed by the city were wheelchair accessible. 7%. Lyft customers in New York waited an average of 9 minutes for a wheelchair accessible vehicle. That is more than double the 4.1-minute average wait for a standard ride. Uber's gap was smaller, but still significant. Wheelchair users waited 4.3 minutes compared to 2.3 minutes for everyone else. And those are the official numbers from the best case market. In most American cities, wheelchair-accessible rideshare vehicles simply do not exist. Here is what actually happens when a wheelchair user requests a standard Uber or Lyft. The driver accepts the ride based on the pickup location and destination. They drive to the pickup point. They see the passenger is in a wheelchair. Now the driver has a choice. Loading a manual wheelchair means getting out, folding the chair, lifting it into the trunk, and helping the passenger transfer to a seat. That takes time. For a power wheelchair, the situation is completely different. A power wheelchair cannot be folded or lifted into a trunk. It requires a vehicle with a ramp or a lift that the driver almost certainly does not have, so the driver cancels, or they simply never show up. And when the next driver accepts and the same thing happens, the wheelchair user is left on a curb, watching car after car drive past them. One rider in California described trying to book a rideshare 5 times in 90 minutes before a driver finally accepted. The legal history here is damning. In 2020, Lyft was ordered to pay $40,000 to the federal government after the Department of Justice found the company in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Among the plaintiffs was a veteran who had lost both legs in combat and was denied transportation. In 2019, Uber was sued in a class action lawsuit by wheelchair users in Pittsburgh who said accessible vehicles were simply unavailable through the app. In 2022, Uber settled a separate lawsuit. Under a settlement agreement, both companies are now prohibited from charging waiting fees if disabled passengers take longer to board. But the core problem remains. There are not enough accessible vehicles. The drivers who do have them are not adequately compensated for the extra time. And the enforcement of anti-discrimination policies is left to the very companies that profit from keeping costs low and ride times short. You might be thinking, okay, so just use public transit instead. But public transportation has its own accessibility crisis. Approximately 25.5 million Americans have travel-limiting disabilities. Many subway stations in major cities still lack elevators. Bus ramps malfunction regularly. Paratransit services, which are supposed to provide door-to-door transportation for disabled riders, require scheduling 24 hours or more in advance. One paratransit user in Atlanta described waiting up to 45 minutes for a ride she had booked the day before. And paratransit is not available everywhere. In rural and suburban areas, it may not exist at all. So for many wheelchair users, rideshare is not a convenience. It is the only realistic option. And when that option cancels on you over and over again, you stop going places. You miss doctor appointments. You skip social events. You turn down job opportunities, not because you cannot do the work, but because you cannot get there. If this information matters to you, hit subscribe right now. This channel is here to tell the stories that no one else is telling about what it actually means to live with a disability in this country. Now here is where the story takes an even darker turn. Self-driving cars were supposed to solve this problem. Autonomous vehicles do not discriminate. They do not see a wheelchair and hit cancel. They do not refuse service because loading takes an extra 3 minutes. In theory, self-driving technology should be the single greatest transportation advancement for the disability community in decades. But the reality is falling short. Most autonomous vehicles currently being tested and deployed are not wheelchair accessible. They do not have ramps. They do not have lifts. They do not have securement systems for passengers who remain in their wheelchairs. And here is the legal gap that makes it worse. In several states, laws that were originally written to prevent cities from over-regulating rideshare companies are now being used to shield autonomous vehicle operators from wheelchair accessibility mandates. The same legal loophole that lets Uber and Lyft avoid full ADA compliance is being inherited by the next generation of transportation technology. There are some signs of movement. In Minnesota, a bill was introduced in March of 2026 that would require autonomous vehicle operators to meet wheelchair accessibility standards. It is one of the first state-level attempts to close the loophole before the technology becomes widespread. Advocacy organizations like the National Federation of the Blind and the United Spinal Association are pushing automakers to center disability access in autonomous vehicle design rather than treating it as an afterthought. One company, May Mobility, has developed an autonomous vehicle with an ADA-compliant wheelchair ramp and a universal securement system designed to work with virtually any type of wheelchair. But they are the exception, not the rule, and the clock is ticking. Once autonomous rideshare fleets are deployed at scale without accessibility built in, retrofitting becomes exponentially more expensive and less likely. The window to get this right is now, and it is closing. Let us talk about what this actually costs in human terms. Research from the disability community reveals that 27% of guide dog handlers have reduced their social activities because of repeated rideshare denials. 46% reported psychological consequences, including stress, anxiety, and feelings of degradation. Those numbers apply to guide dog users specifically, but the pattern extends across the entire disability community. When you get denied a ride enough times, you internalize a message. The message is that the world was not designed for you, and the companies that could fix it do not care enough to try. You start planning your entire life around transportation uncertainty. You leave 2 hours early for a 30-minute appointment. You decline invitations because you are not sure you can get home. You stop applying for jobs that require a commute. The isolation is gradual, but it is real. And it is not caused by disability. It is caused by a system that treats accessibility as optional. There is a financial dimension to this that people rarely discuss. The average wheelchair-accessible vehicle costs significantly more than a standard car. Modifying a vehicle with a ramp and a securement system can add $15,000 to $30,000 to the price. Uber and Lyft do not provide these vehicles. They rely on drivers to supply their own, and there is no financial incentive built into the platform to offset the cost of buying or leasing an accessible vehicle. In New York City, a $1 per trip surcharge on yellow taxi rides goes to the Taxi Improvement Fund, which distributes millions of dollars annually to medallion owners who switch to accessible vehicles. But there is no equivalent fund for rideshare vehicles. The report from New York Lawyers for the Public Interest recommended establishing a similar per-trip surcharge on Uber and Lyft rides to incentivize accessible vehicle adoption. As of right now, that recommendation has not been implemented. The companies have no financial obligation to make their fleets accessible, and so they do not. Here is what makes this situation uniquely frustrating. The technology to fix this problem already exists. Wheelchair-accessible vehicles exist, ramps exist, securement systems exist, autonomous vehicles with built-in accessibility exist. The barrier is not engineering. The barrier is economics and political will. Uber and Lyft are publicly traded companies worth billions of dollars. They could build accessibility incentives into their platforms. They could subsidize accessible vehicle leases for drivers. They could create dedicated accessible fleets in every major market. They could pay drivers a premium for accommodating wheelchair users. They choose not to because the disability community represents a small percentage of their total ridership, and serving them costs more than ignoring them. That is not a technology problem. That is a values problem, and until the cost of discrimination exceeds the cost of accommodation, nothing will change. 40% denied service, 7% of vehicles accessible, 9-minute wait times versus 4, 5 ride requests just to get one driver who will show up, a veteran who lost his legs in combat left on a curb by a billion-dollar company. These are not edge cases. These are the baseline experience for wheelchair users trying to get a ride in the United States in 2026. Uber and Lyft changed transportation for hundreds of millions of people. They made it faster, cheaper, and more convenient than anything that came before. But they built that revolution on a model that structurally excludes people with disabilities. And until riders, regulators, and the companies themselves decide that accessibility is not optional, millions of Americans will keep watching their rides drive away. If you know someone who needs to hear this, share this video and leave a comment below. Have you ever been denied a rideshare because of a disability? I want to hear your story. Because your story is the one that can change this.